The clay must be well separated before you fill the first frame. The clay should feel soft to the touch. The first frame to be filled with casting clay is the one with a raised edge. Turn the frame so that the raised edge is on the underside to prevent the connecting edge being damaged by hammering. After filling the first frame with clay, compact it with a hammer. Do not compact the clay in the first frame too much, as we must be able to press in a model. In the second example in this film, I will be demonstrating that we sometimes need to more fully compact the clay in the first frame. After the excess clay has been scraped off, we will check for possible holes on the other side. We can fill surface holes with a little casting clay. It is important that the surface is well smoothed so that the clay will be compacted into the second frame, does not stick to it. Assume that the smoother the surface, the better. The pattern to be cast should now be pressed halfway into the clay. Make sure that the pattern is always level in the clay. There will often be space between the pattern and the clay. This is because we can never push perfectly straight. If there is space, use a steel rule to smooth the clay against the pattern. Press the clay down on the outside with a steel rule. On the inside we can use a nail head. Of course, we need to have first filed the nail head flat. The function of the talcum powder that we use is to stop the clay from the second frame sticking to the clay of the first. Spread the talcum powder with a soft paintbrush over the whole surface and blow off any excess powder. As soon as the surface of the first frame is completely smooth, with no loose bits of clay, we can attach the second frame. Make sure that the index marks on the side of the fitted frames are aligned. The indexing is to ensure that the mould can always be reassembled in the same position. The clay in the second frame can be more compacted than the clay in the first frame because we don't have to press in a model. Make sure that the working area is always clean. This makes it easier to see what you are doing. The mould should be frequently cleaned and checked. Prior to separating the halves, check the position of the index marks. Never pull apart in one go, but with meshed fingers, first prise the mould loose. Now we can carefully separate the mould. A simple ring such as this can easily be taken out of the mould, but if it should stick, first move it slightly. This will create enough extra space to allow the model to be removed. We can also use this procedure for a ring that would otherwise be too thin to cast. If the ring is too thin, the mould will not fill with gold or silver. By moving the ring back and forth, we widen the mould and make it easier to fill. A model used for casting should never be too thin. When casting, We should also make allowance for material shrinkage and the finishing of the casting. For this reason, we should always make a model a little thicker. Now cut away enough clay at the point where the pouring channel will be, and prick a hole using a drill to form a feeder. Put the point of a penknife in the hole and carve out a funnel. Cut the funnel deep enough to connect to the ring cavity. Flatten down all the loose particles of clay with the smooth end of a drill, and make the narrow end of the funnel sufficiently wide. Ensure that the narrow opening in the feeder is never less than 4 mm wide. This diagram shows the most frequently made mistakes in sand casting. A shallow funnel with too narrow a passageway to the ring. This mould can never fill. Always carve the funnel right down to the ring cavity and make the neck at least 4 mm. If you have just started casting and are still learning the whole process, it is better to make an oversized feeder. When you have had more experience, you can reduce the feeder opening. Opposite the feeder, we now prick a number of vents. These are the points where air can escape. Make a runner to the ring cavity using the point of a penknife blade. It is also possible to make vents directly from the ring. This is generally preferable. Make sure that the impression isn't damaged. The mould is now ready for casting. Connect the two halves of the mould together again. Make sure that the index marks on the side of the frame are aligned just as they were when they were taken apart. One of the benefits of this casting method is that all qualities of gold and silver can be cast. Naturally, it is also possible to use gold and silver scrap. You can melt gold and silver as well as brass in a ceramic crucible, such as the one I am using here. If we want to melt bronze or copper, we will need to use a graphite crucible. The torch being used here is a simple propane torch. This torch cannot overheat the metal. Beware, some torches can heat the metal to such an extent that it becomes brittle or porous. Sometimes flux powder will be required. Never use too much, because if it gets into the mould, it may be visible on the surface of the casting. Hold the crucible over the mould. The distance between the mould and the crucible should be as little as possible. As soon as it is completely molten, we must pour the metal as quickly as possible. It is important to keep the torch on the metal during pouring. The mould can be cooled in water as soon as pouring is finished. This has no detrimental effect on the metal. The clay should be well dried before we separate the mould. The clay does not absorb water and can therefore be immediately reused. All that remains is to open the mould and remove the casting ready for finishing.